Hello, my name is Jared Wilson and I am the Editor-in-Chief of LeftLion. We have a very special guest for you on today's podcast. Meadows is a legend of British film and television. In the mid-1990s, he was making lots of short films around Nottingham. In 1997, he released his debut feature, 24/7. Since then, he's gone on to create masterpieces like A Room for Romeo Brass, Dead Man's Shoes, This Is England, The Virtues, Gallows Pole, and quite a few more. Shane was also the cover star of the first ever printed issue of LeftLion Magazine back in autumn 2004. To put that into perspective, this month we released issue 176. Where does all the time go? So as you might guess, I've been a fan of the work of Shane Meadows for a long time, and this was the third time that we've done an interview together, the two previous ones both being in print for LeftLion. Shane's very well known across the whole country, but I think people in Nottingham especially love his work, as not only is it just brilliant, but we also get to see places and often people that we know reflected in it. He's also probably the most consistent director of the last 2 decades, but he's down to earth enough to give up his time to do this podcast with us. It was recorded in front of a live audience at Nottingham Central Library on Friday the 4th of October 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Shane Meadows.
Hi, this is Sophie from LeftLion, Nottingham's iconic culture magazine. Each month we publish a beautiful free magazine that shines a light on the art, music, food, literature and more that makes Nottingham such a vibrant and creative city to live in. It's a bit unusual for a local print magazine to exist these days, but we've managed to keep going for over 20 years, giving the city's artists, photographers and writers a platform to publish their work. We distribute 15,000 copies in over 300 venues across the county, and you can find LeftLion in every local library, every Castle Rock pub, in all active Nottingham leisure centres, and all the best bars, cafes and hangouts in Nottingham. If you're ever in town at the start of the month, you may have seen our LeftLion bike rolling around the streets. In line with our pledge to be a carbon neutral company, we deliver our magazines on foot, by electric bicycle or where strictly necessary by van. You can also read the full magazine and lots more for free at leftlion.co.uk. Check out the events listings on our website to find out what's going on in Notts, and if you'd like to promote your business or organisation with us, please visit leftlion.co.uk/advertise.
So my first question, Shane, as well as a creator of film and TV, I know you're just a fan of TV as well. What have you been watching recently?
It's maybe like a plumber, you know, where they don't want to do plumbing when they get home. So I'm doing stuff. I mean, I've been getting into documentaries a lot recently, and but I don't tend to watch when I'm making a film or a film of a specific genre or write something. I tend to go into a period of watching work and going into certain directors. But I've been all over Celebrity Race Across the World. Been loving that one. But I've seen a couple of amazing documentaries on BBC iPlayer in the last couple of weeks. One was called Corridors of Power: Should America Govern or Rule the World? That blew my brains. It was. I wouldn't recommend it if you're faint of heart, because it doesn't pull any punches. But it talked about right from the sort of early. From the Bosnian sort of crisis, and it looks at genocide across the last 20-30 years, and I found that very difficult to watch, but I felt like when I started it I had to see it through. It was an incredible series, and so I've been getting a lot more into documentaries, the time between very hard-hitting documentaries and Race Across the World, probably to take the edge off afterwards.
Well, I know it's not recent as well, but I've heard you enthuse about Wild Wild Country before.
Yeah, all of those, they're sort of, because there seem to be, I mean, that one was the craziest of all of them, but there's so many, because I think you go on Netflix and so many of them seem to be murderers, why we murder, worst roommate, who murdered someone, so I try to swerve those because I like to feel a little bit happy, but Wild Wild Country was like properly those ones that really sort of stretch the boundaries, and the fact that they all videotape it, so for the next 30 years later they can make a big show of it. That was out there, that one.
If anyone's not seen that, it's on Netflix still, I think, and it's these people move to America and they're like a bit like a cult, and they kind of moved to this town. Loads of people in the town are like, why have they moved here? And then suddenly they elect one of them as mayor of the town, and then suddenly they start to kick everyone out of the town, and then they get guns. Okay, and it's pretty good, isn't it?
They start poisoning the locals. It's wild, yeah. And I think their version of the police officers wear like pink suits and stuff, and they create all that. They got so cheesed off with the locals that they moved enough people in that they had more votes than the locals. That's how they ended up becoming governor of their own town. It is a crazy series.
And why is it you don't enjoy watching, I guess, like fiction so much?
I do. I tend to sort of. I went through a phase. I think when I was first making films, and when I wanted to make films, and I was going into, select a disc HMV, and I would, I really went through a phase of watching, many films, and fell in love with a lot of European directors. Obviously, I started off really being obsessed, I suppose, with Martin Scorsese and especially Mean Streets. Mean Streets had a big impact on me because I'd seen Goodfellas and could never in a million years imagine myself being able to achieve anything like that. But with Mean Streets, because it was about smaller time crooks, it ended up giving me the confidence to make Small Time, this little film I made in '96 with much smaller time crooks. But then I suppose I got into European directors. Werner Herzog's been a big inspiration to me and still is, because he does whatever he makes documentaries, he makes features. He's made some in Hollywood with big Hollywood actors, and he also had an amazing career in Germany. And so there's people I've picked up on, but I think it's just one of those that when you're writing scripts and editing and your life is kind of consumed with it, that seeing if Callie Brook won Race Across the World somehow seems a little more attractive at 8:30 at night when you're knackered.
I can see that. Okay, so last year you were invited to give the BAFTA David Lean lecture. I didn't really know what that was until you did it, but then you look at the list of people that did it before you. Who was on that list, Shane?
Yeah, it's a who's who of people, because when I got it, I've got a feeling that someone was meant to do it before me that year, and then they bailed it or something, because it was like, someone contacted me and I was like, that's about 3 weeks away, and I went, fine, and then like the minute I'd done it, like people were ringing up trying to measure me for suits and like, do you mind if we use this 3-piece? It's like, it felt a little bit like someone had bailed and I got in late. I also, there's a brilliant thing, my son's here with me tonight, and because I don't normally I get nervous when when you have to open a film or you're doing a speech before a film. I'm not too bad in these situations, but that, because you tend to be, someone's asking you questions, but that was, you had to write a speech of about 40 minutes and talk, and that's not my bag, and it's the most nervous I've ever been doing anything. And what happened on the night, so I nearly cried at the beginning because I started talking about my mum and dad, and my mum had passed away, so like I'm doing a Gwyneth Paltrow about a minute in, I'm going, oh, yeah. So it didn't go great. My kids are there, and they did a beautiful thing, and it is a massive thing. I mean, the people, you look at the line, from the David Lean Foundation, they tend to be really, and I have imposter syndrome anyway. So you look at the list of people who've gone before you, and you're just thinking, I do not fit in the Richard Attenborough sort of gang.
Martin Scorsese. What did he do 3 years
I went
before?
to the Scorsese one a few years before, and I queued up as a punter, and it was like, so I didn't and don't feel like I belong in that, but it was I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to have to talk from a script for 40 minutes, but I knew I might never get the chance again. But so they, it's funny, but it isn't funny, because I managed to get a sports injury while I was doing it, and they set up the stage, and they said, we want it to feel comfortable for you. Martin Scorsese probably had, like Oscar statues and things. With me, I had a 3-piece suite from the 80s. It was brilliant, but someone must have sawed the legs off it, because when I sat on it, and I'm not big, but my knees were really quite high, and I was thinking, this hasn't even got legs. And because I was nervous, I do this weird thing where I cross my legs when I'm nervous, and I cross my legs for like, when I sat down to do this Q&A, and like 30 minutes into this thing, I uncrossed them, and I got this ripping sensation in my knee. There's still 10 minutes to go on this thing, and the only way I could get comfortable is sitting like with my leg out like that. And my wife and kids are looking at me going, like, what are you doing with your leg? And I'm just going, I've since found out I had a bucket tear in my meniscus, and the cartilage had gone from one side of my knee, ripped, and gone into my joint whilst I was on stage. So So I finished this chat, and people are clapping. And for what, like, had I been at home, I'd have screamed, and the roof would have fallen off. It hurt that much. But so everyone claps at the end, and I meant to stand up, and I went to stand up, and I felt it again, and I was like, so anyway, I left BAFTA in a wheelchair. Well, I say I left BAFTA in a wheelchair. They wouldn't let me take it to the hotel because of insurance. They needed it for the morning, so they tipped me into an Uber. And I went back to the hotel, and anyway, the next couple of days I was at Ilkeston Hospital, and I had an operation about 2 months ago, and I had to have all my meniscus repaired from sitting in a chair at BAFTA. So the greatest day of my life, the proudest moment, and I managed to get a tennis injury sat in a chair.
So, if anyone's not seen that, it's all on YouTube, and it is amazing to see the living room that you created for that and all that. But in terms of what you said in the speech as well, it was really passionate. It was about inspiring young filmmakers, and you talked a lot about your process. What is it that makes you want to inspire young filmmakers?
Well, it's because when I very accidentally fell into filmmaking. Me and Paddy Considine, who I met on a drama course in Burton-on-Trent, we both wanted to be actors, and we went on this like a BTEC level. It's like, you've just done your O-levels at school, which I didn't do, but I went on this course, and me and Paddy I think we both took a film studies course, and while being in that film studies course, there was loads of people in there that were like proper film swats. They'd come in, they'd have like 5, 10 books, and there'd be storyboard and all of these things. So it never felt in any way like, I've always been a storyteller. And me and Paddy, we made this film while we were on this drama course called this really, really crap 70s cop film. And I weirdly end up sort of directing Paddy in it. We were like 16 or 17. But you'd go into, so we were thinking, we've had great fun doing that. And then you'd go in, and the teacher would be kind of like, that's not filmmaking, that's a camcorder, he needs to be on film. And we'd go into these classes, and we both did GCSE film studies. I think Paddy did better than me, but I felt, we watched Jean de Florette, this amazing French film about Gerard Depardieu, moves out of the city, sets up this farm, and ultimately this land, the people who were living next door, they wanted to buy it, didn't win at the auction, and so they don't tell him where this well is in this land. So he's having to walk 20 miles a day to get water to try and keep the farm going, and about 10 meters from his house there's a spring, and they won't tell him, and he ends up dying. And at the end of the film, they were obviously asking for people's interpretations, and I said I wanted to climb into the telly and smash those guys' faces in. So I had an emotional response to it, and other people went, yeah, it's didactic, and it made me think about, so I ultimately didn't think I was a filmmaker, because you needed to be able to talk like that, you needed to do storyboards. So when I was walking back from getting thrown off the photography course at Trent University after a year, and bumped into Graham Ford, and this guy called Roger Not Fail, that were doing a intermediate, were running a film course. It's a bit like what Confetti took the torch and carried it on. I basically saw them starting this course, and luckily got taken in as a volunteer. And it was Graham who spotted that I'd got the nous to be a filmmaker, but I just maybe wasn't good at filling in forms, and I wasn't very good at, and I'd never storyboarded in my life. And so when you realised that your confidence was knocked, and there was obviously an ability there, but it never got found because it didn't fit these kind of regular means. What I did in that first year under this mentor, Graham Ford, he would lend, I was a volunteer, so weirdly as a volunteer I was going and setting up edit suites for people, and in the days where you'd have 3 machines, one tape, master tape, you're going from your tool, that it was really hands-on. It's not as easy as it is now on your phone, and so I learned a lot. But Graham would say, once a month, if you keep working hard, I'll lend you a camcorder. And so I started, I'd wanted to be an actor, but I was, imagine being on a course with Paddy Considine, you're kind of going, if this is Burton-on-Trent and he's turned up, like, what's it like in London? So I go back with these camcorders, and I'm realising all the people I was on the course with have gone home. I'm not going back to Toxteth because I'm sort of staying in the summer. I'm meant to be paying me debts off. And I was acting on this camera by myself, and I realised that whether you're an actor or a director, so much of it comes down to pressure, and so much of it comes down to, you can work on your first short, your first funded feature, and be made to feel quite small by people, or if you've got good people around you, they can really, give you confidence. And so Graham, over the course of that year, helped me to progress in a really unconventional way. So I wasn't on the film course, but he saw that I'd got this appetite and was like, you know, you work hard, and at the end of every month, so I had this like this reward at the end of every month, and by the end of the first year, I'd made 22 short films, and one of them we entered into a competition because I kept wanting to send the first one, which was rubbish, and one of them basically Graham said that's good enough to send into this competition, and that was the film that changed my life really. Where's the Money, Ronnie? Because one of the judges in the competition was a film producer who was making a film in Hollywood with Liam Neeson at the time, and watched this mental short film. Michael Collins, yeah. So he was over in America, and yeah, but what the reason that I, you know, and I can't inspire people, you know, because obviously colleges, universities, they're brilliant places to go and learn, but if you don't fit the mold, I sort of thought that I'd like to take that stage and tell people that there's a different way of doing it. It doesn't have to be conventional, and that sometimes because I was doing it with all my friends, none of us were camera operators or boom operators or actors, but weirdly we all, you know, like in Where's the Money, Ronnie, if I'm in a scene, you know, one of the Marzetti brothers would be holding the camera and he'd be filming it, and it was like, and sometimes I've seen this a lot with young filmmakers. They'll have a brilliant idea for something, they'll go through a funding process, and they have all of the life crushed out of them. It's like, well, you can't bring your producer, you can't bring your mates, you can't bring your mate who did the camera because we've never heard of him, and they end up walking onto a set with nobody that they know, and it's impossible to sort of keep their personality. So that's kind of why I'm passionate. It's like, you know, protecting that, sometimes not having all the frills. I was making those on the dole, but that when somebody did see them, because they felt like slightly different to everything else, it got me noticed.
Because you talked about that in the lecture as well, and I mean, it seems like you honed your craft. You say like 22 short films, and you know, Graham worked you hard, basically, didn't he? And then you talk about your process now, and I've heard this word from you called scriptment, which is, you know, do you want to explain that and a bit about your process and how you see it?
Yeah, so a scriptment is basically the compromise I've made with the world at large in terms of, it's a working document. But to be honest, sometimes there's some projects I'm working on that we've developed full scripts for, but that tends to come. I've just been working with Jack Thorne on an idea, but when I do my own, I tend to, because my films generally always, the soundtrack's quite important, you know, the visuals and the way in which the characters talk. So rather than, and I also change it a lot. The reason this happened is I did, I think it was This Is England and Dead Man's Shoes to some degree, but definitely This Is England. So much changed as we were making it. We'd had a script, you give people the script, and I remember when some of the executive producers came to see the film, and what was written in the script was this big fight on a beach at the end, and they were expecting this. So in a way, what they were expecting, because, you know, the most violent thing in the film was much more a microcosm of violence in Britain. It was Combo beating Milky, but it was much more intense because it was set in this place you couldn't escape from. And obviously they were expecting this quadrophenia, mods and rockers fight, you know, on the beach. And so what I learned was, if I deliver these scripts, people come to see them, and they're disappointed because they aren't getting what they thought they were getting. So scriptments fill this neat little hole where they get a sense of what's coming, but you haven't painted every single colour in. Because I'm saying, look, if you want it to be finished as a script, buy a book. You know, this is like a starting point. And so scriptments will have loads of images. I create Spotify playlists. There'll be character breakdowns. I'll kind of do a tagline, a log line. They're like a mixture of, I think, what do they call these? There's a name for them. I can't remember. There's like these things now that people do where it's like a pitch deck, I think they call it, that they put them in that are like visual documents to get you into it with references. This is like a hybrid of that. So there'll be anything from sort of 30 to sort of 40, 50 pages. So they're like half the size of a script. But as you turn pages, there'll be photographs, documents, director's notes, soundtracks. You can turn a song on Spotify to listen to. So it's a bit more immersive.
Yeah. And it's not a finished script or a, you know.
No, yeah, the Gallows Pole, which we did last, and it didn't work because it ended up like being too expensive to do, but they were done on scriptments. But trying to do improvisation in the 1700s I found quite tricky, because you can't just, if that pub doesn't work, you can't just go down to the next one, or you can't go to Weatherspoons up the road. You've got to build one. So
So let's talk about Gallows Pole. It seemed like quite a change in your work, because obviously there's a lot of you in your work, and then with Gallows Pole, suddenly it's the first thing not in the 20th century. It's an adaptation of someone else's book. What was it that led you to want to make that?
Yeah, well, after the Virtues, because the Virtues was probably, everything I've done has been personal to a point, and that was probably the most. And there was a sense of a full stop to some degree. Not that you don't want to look at your own life. What I've realised is you have to be drawn. It's a bit like Bartley Gorman, who I grew up. He's a bare knuckle fighter from Uttoxeter, and I grew up knowing this man, and it's like, so I probably wouldn't be drawn to a story about bare knuckle, but when you grew up knowing somebody, although that wasn't my experience, I was really kind of drawn to it and drawn to Bartley. And so when I got the book, I'd just finished the Virtues and kind of needed a break from the autobiographical thing. And I loved the fact that he probably was Robin Hood, this guy. They can't prove Robin Hood existed, but not much further up in Yorkshire is a guy that literally was taking gold coins when the working classes were absolute. It was this period where literally, I think there was something 237 things you could be hung for, and it was all just to stop you going onto people's land so they could just wander around freely. And it was a really difficult time, and so crime became very prevalent. But there was something so ingenious about the fact that this guy was clipping coins. So in theory, he kind of wasn't stealing. He's taking a coin, it was made of gold or made of silver, and just taking a bit off the edge so it's still a coin. But every 10, 15, 20 coins, he's using what he clipped off and making new coins. So the coins aren't disappearing. It's that's the theory. But then it nearly brought the UK economy down because they did it to such a huge degree. It's like they were printing money, basically. And I was really taken with the fact that and I'm from a small market town that was surrounded by a lot of rural communities, and there was something about it that I was really drawn to.
So how did you discover the book? Did someone hand it to you, or did you pick it up in an airport?
No, someone sent it to me. The guy that wrote Gallows Pole, Ben, had sent it to, I think it had come out and it won a few awards. And what happens in these things is people will option them, not people in my position. Someone that's got a production company might option a book, and then they'll go to the author, and the author might have some preconceived ideas. And he never told me about his casting idea, Ben, but he did, he obviously said, I'd always wanted you to do it. And it turned out Michael Socker got cast, but he always had Michael Socker in his head. I don't think he let me on until I got Michael in, but it turned out that was his kind of dream combination.
So that leads nicely. I was going to ask you about Michael's Socker. Is that how I say it? Socher? Yeah. Socker. Obviously, you worked with him before in This Is England. Tell us a bit about his qualities as an actor and what he brought to that part.
Well, what I really wanted to try and do with the Gallows, and obviously the only slightly sad thing about the Gallows is we got 3 episodes in. We had a lot of issues in all sorts of areas, but COVID kind of took us down a bit at the end. And so the series was never meant to finish 3, and it was meant to be, the first series is meant to end where this guy who's trying to be spiritually better, a better human being, give back to the community, has been a very bad man in his past. And there's kind of a lot of evidence to suggest David Hartley, before he came back to Yorkshire, had actually been in Birmingham, possibly murdered somebody, so there was this kind of, and so where we ended up finishing the story 3 episodes in wasn't really, the place we were meant to end series 1 was with him coming out of retirement as a bad guy and having to tip molten gold down someone that's been robbing him's throat. And so that was meant to be the end of the first series. But, loads of productions were struggling at the time. So we only really ever got a little bit of the way in to when they first made their first batch of coins, which was a nice upbeat. Me, I like a sort of quite tragic, the idea of melting gold in a pub and tipping it down someone's mouth who's been nicking off you. That seemed like a good ending, but we didn't quite get there. But Michael, the thing I loved most about Michael was that a lot of people who would come and audition would see this guy in their head like a Heathcliff character. And I kept saying to Michael, I love the idea that, we've seen that a million times, the Robin Hood thing, the kind of the Bravehearts, that leading an army. I love the idea of a guy that's as hard as nails, but maybe isn't so good at the talking. So this idea, there was these big speeches, and I loved the idea. Michael was really honest, and he was sort of saying, I've never played a character like this. And what I tend to do is, if I think it's right and someone's naturally that way inclined, I was going to be really interested to investigate that. So the speeches that were coming up in the following episodes, his missus, his wife's having to like talk him around, and he's honking in a bucket because he doesn't like public speaking and stuff, you know. And it was this, I loved the idea of Michael bringing a softness and a comedy, so that when it got to the moments where he actually changed, and a bit like Paddy Considine in Romeo Brass, where you're kind of watching it, you have no concept that this person, even though we've seen in the Gallows that he's been involved in this knife fight, that you soften him to the point that when he actually shows who he really was and can be again. I found that quite exciting, and I thought Michael was probably, you know, and because he came in being that honest about, nervous about those big moments, I thought that was a really lovely way in.
So Gallows Pole was also the first thing you did for the BBC, is that right?
I did a film for the BBC. I think Romeo Brass was maybe fun about, but in terms of TV, it was the first thing. Yeah.
Did that, you know, did that make you feel anything particular? Because a lot of it was on Channel 4.
Yeah. Well, what happened was the guy that had done This Is England 90, Piers Wenger, he left Channel 4 and went to the BBC. So weirdly, there was a lot of people had left, and the business at the moment, no one's in the same job for 6 months. And I had no idea who was going to replace Piers. They hadn't got a replacement. And so to get my next project, sometimes when people come into a job, it's like a new boss comes in, and I'd been really in vogue at Channel 4, and I was thinking my luck's going to run out at some point. They'll come in and they'll get rid of me. I'll be like the old news. And so Piers asked me to go over, and that's why it happened. It wasn't like weirdly, it was almost like working with the same team.
So Michael's also one of many actors that you discovered through Nottingham's Television Workshop. Probably about a third of the audience here are from Television Workshop, but for the other 2/3, can you tell us a bit about what it is and why it's important to you and Nottingham?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was at a fundraiser last night that was really successful and brilliant, and obviously really brought home, because I sort of knew, but I didn't realise that they had actually no funding whatsoever, you know, and so the principle behind the workshop, and I won't explain it as well as Ali would, but fundamentally it's open to people irrelevant to financial situation, and always has been, but that's become, with no funding whatsoever, that's very hard to be a viable thing, because if the people that you want to be in those classes are from backgrounds and they've got no money, they've only got limited funds. And so, you know, that ethos, which when I first went there in 96, which was very easy because they had the backing of the studios still at the time. You know, Ali now we were talking earlier, it's like she's the most incredible teacher, you know, teaching acting to people, but she has so much paperwork to try and keep the wolf from the door, you know. But initially, so the ethos of that struck a chord with me, because it was like I got that opportunity with Graham, and when I went the first time for 24/7, I'd been in London, and we'd done some auditions down there, and I've been to a couple of different drama schools, and obviously I'm not in that world, so I was kind of thinking, I didn't know at the time, but I look back now and I realised I wasn't finding the right kind of people. And I walked into the workshop, and you're almost thinking, well, maybe that guy we saw here and that guy we went to Watford, and then I went into the workshop, and it was like night and day in terms of, you gave them the script, you gave them the scene, and what was going on was that the gang that I got introduced to, that literally just everyone in that audition just were in the film the same day. And it was because they'd all kind of grown up together in the workshop. So they might go there at 8, 9 years old. And I think when I went down, I think some of them, they stop at 21, and I think a couple of them were maybe just past that. And so this group got put together, and it was like they'd got the ability to improvise in the way that I liked, but what they learned, so they've got this thing that they can do kind of everything at the workshop. For me, their gift, we did some rehearsals last week with some of the new guys that are coming through, and it's still what they do with improvisation I've never seen anywhere else on the planet, let alone in the UK. And seeing that and being able to, you know, going from making these crazy improvised short films to I went from making things for literally the cost of a tape to walking on set with Bob Hoskins, and it's £1.5 million, which now would be like £6 or £7 million. So I was on the dole, and then all of a sudden people are sawing wood on the set and making things, and if they hadn't been on that with me, because we were all really similar, I wouldn't have made it through that job, I don't think. And so, that was, I knew nothing then. And then when I went back for Romeo Brass, it was obviously, I didn't go and search the country. I started in Nottingham, and I start in Nottingham every single time if people of that age group are needed. So I owe a great deal to the workshop.
I mean, just to say as well, it's something I've been aware of for 30 odd years, and grew up as a teenager having friends in it. And it's not, Shane's work's been a big part of it, but it's not just the actors that through Shane, like Vicky and others that have come through it. It's Bella Ramsey, it's Samantha Morton, it's all these incredible people. And I think one thing I've noticed over the years is when 30 years ago, when I was a teenager and people were in it, people used to get parts in The Bill and in Casualty and things like that, and now they get parts in Marvel and Star Wars and Game of Thrones. And it's just crazy, isn't it? Because these are people that are training down the road in this this unit within a mile of this office that has no funding. Yeah, it's just producing all this amazing talent. It's like RADA for working class people, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a bit about The Virtues. It was your first piece after This Is England. I watched it back recently, and I think it's even better the second time. Firstly, were the parts of Joseph and Anna originally written with Stephen Graham and Helen Behan in mind?
I think, I mean, I think I'd spoken to Stephen about the concept of that story like years and years ago. So it went on quite a journey. The Virtues, again, the Scriptment thing is, I think at one stage it was kind of a little bit more of a kind of, he like met a sort of the sister character that appears in it. He kind of met on the boat on the way over to Ireland. So it ultimately went through a number of different incarnations. But Stephen, I'd spoken to about that maybe 10 years, maybe just after This Is England. I told him I wanted to do this story. And Helen, I obviously, because I got to know her through making the, from This Is England 88 and into 90, because Helen I'd met her, I was on holiday with my wife and children in Ireland, and we met in a pub, and she was singing in this pub, and someone had recognised me and said, "Oh, I like This Is England," and said, "There's a woman coming in here," and that we all thought would have been an actress. You hear it sometimes and you start shitting yourself thinking, "Oh God," and they said she's coming in to sing, and I was like, "Oh God, this is going to be like," and she came in and sang, and it was, one of those moments, and I got talking to her, and it was just that the whole community, it reminded me a bit of home. And but she had this way of, she'd said, basically, yeah, I wanted to be an actress, but obviously I've, got married, we've got kids, we're dead happy. But she said, she wrote on this piece of paper, Helen, give me an in, ! She said, if ever you need a nurse for anything, I'm your woman. So I put this in my wallet, and then I rolled forward to This Is England 88, and I was doing something with Vicky. I think almost like we were rehearsing, and the nurse character wasn't. She went to see somebody in the doctors, but it wasn't a big scene. It was just a kind of moment, and I just went, I think this could be a really special moment of the thing, and I really feel like I've met a nurse who acts or was an actress. Anyway, so I opened my wallet. This is maybe a year later, and I found this Give Me an In, and I rang it, and Helen answered, and the next day she came over and did an audition. With Vicky. She threw up in the toilets, came out, did an audition with Vicky, which was mind-blowing, and then, so she did that from absolutely nowhere, and then in This Is England 90, again, she started to show real growth, and that was when I sort of said, I really think that she's incredibly special, and this is for Helen. I wouldn't do it if it was myself, but I actually had got contacted by Daniel Day-Lewis a few months ago, who'd seen The Virtues and wanted me to pass on to Helen how much he loved her performance, which is like, so that's amazing. Yeah, that was like, I was thinking, someone said he wants to speak to you. I was thinking, hey, I was like, oh, I'll pass it on.
PJ Harvey did the soundtrack of The Virtues as well. How did that happen?
So Polly reached out to me, and I think she'd got into a situation where, I don't know whether it was someone in a record company, but they'd said, I think she's done soundtracks, she's done music for theatre, and I think she must have sat down and said, because we've all got bucket lists of, I don't mean, mine, but there's actors I would love to have met or worked with. And I was on this list of people that she would like to have worked with. And as we were coming into The Virtues, and obviously I'm a huge fan, so I went to meet her and was talking about The Virtues. We had a conversation, and she sent me a load of demo tapes that she's done over the years of unfinished tracks or little. And what was mental was we took those in, and the whole idea was I was going to use some of these as little temp things within there, but they became so ingrained in the film that she never had to write the soundtrack, apart from maybe a few bits and pieces and remastering. So it sort of came from this archive that I told her the idea that we'd got. She went into her archive and pulled these things. I've got to finish. She sent me some new pieces as we went along, but we never went back into the studio to record it. It kind of was completed not by accident, but almost the pieces that she'd sent were so incredible that we never needed to go back.
For 2 decades and nearing 200 printed issues, LeftLion Magazine has shone a light on Nottingham's culture and entertainment scene. We believe we are part of what makes the city unique. Not many others in the country or world have a free independent press like us. LeftLion is Nottingham's meeting point for information about what's going on in our city, from the big companies and issues to the grassroots, promoters and community organisations. Our printed magazine is free to access for all, and we believe it's important it stays like that. However, we are increasingly relying upon donations from our readers to continue what we do. If you'd like to support our work, then you can do so by making a monthly pledge at Patreon/LeftLion. By pledging just £2 per month, you'll help make a real difference and will receive the digital copy of our magazine before it's available in town or on our website. If you pledge £5 per month, we'll also print your name or the name of a loved one, your band, your small business or your pet in each issue. If you can support us with a pledge of £10 per month, we'll also send you each issue through the post, and you'll receive an art print of the cover with each copy, plus occasional other free gifts too. For more details about supporting LeftLion, please visit patreon.com/LeftLion.
So let's talk about revenge, because it's obviously in The Virtues, it's all about revenge. Dead Man's Shoes and This Is England. How aware are you of revenge when you're writing, and what is it that fascinates you about it?
It's probably hard to sort of dissect, other than obviously Dead Man's Shoes is probably the biggest example of it, and that did come from a conversation. Me and Paddy were at the boxing club in Burton-on-Trent, and we were looking at doing an idea about a sort of vigilante, but it was a bit more comedic. It was a bit more small town, like a vigilante trying to stop kids getting into drugs. It was like we were doing a bit of a comedy idea, and we never could quite get it right. And I just remember both of us one night had a conversation about some similar things we'd seen around drugs and around people lacing people with drugs and that community, that sort of thing. And we were both talking about some of those things that got buried, that and the people almost have sort of swapped it under the carpet, like it's never going to be brought back, spoken about. There's no justice for the people that suffered that, and somehow it pricked our consciences to the point that we sort of wanted to create. There's no safer place really than in film to create an avenging angel for some of the things that were. And what's really, I think, the fact that it was something that both of us kind of knew. At least one situation where maybe we were kids and we hadn't spoken up because we were too little, or because we weren't getting it. We were just glad we weren't getting it and weren't brave enough to say anything. We both had a bit of, we might have been 10, 11, 12 years old. You're not going to, but at the same time, you wished you had. And so Richard really became that. I think it was this guy of almost like someone that comes back to go, you think you buried that baby. Well, you haven't. And we're going to talk about it. And I really like the idea of that. And I'd always been obsessed with Westerns, and pretty much every Western, starts off, someone comes in, nicks a load of stuff from the town, and then someone helps, teaches them all how to shoot, and then they get their own back.
So what's the best revenge you've ever enacted yourself in real life?
My dad had revenge enacted on him in a way that was brilliant, where he was drunk once in a Chinese restaurant in Uttoxeter, and he tried to sneak out the toilet window without paying. And I think he got his like shirt caught on the little thing that sticks up on the window and didn't escape, and got banned and was only allowed to have takeaways. Even now when I go back with him, that he has to pay at the counter before his orders. But we've never worked. If anyone can work out what this is, I would love to know. But my dad, from that moment onwards, because he wasn't allowed to pick the takeaways up, so I'd go in, and 1 week he'd have his regular, after this incident where he's tried to sneak off, he opened his food and everything he'd ordered had a fried egg in it. So like spare ribs, fried egg, chicken chow mein, fried egg, and curry sauce, fried egg. And it went on for about 6 months, to the point that it ruined his head so much that he actually said to me, we're going to swap meals tonight. He said, basically, because he went and had it out with Tony, and Tony was going, I don't know what you mean. You know, some of the dishes come with an egg. There must have been an accident. Long story short, it broke my dad. It kind of broke him, and he just kind of gave in, and then they had a big conversation, and Tony said, look, I'll let you come back. I don't know what you mean about the egg, but whenever you come in, your friends can sit down. You order at the counter here with me. You pay, then you sit down. No more eggs. And that's so. If anyone can tell me what the significance of those eggs were, one night we swapped dishes because they obviously knew what he ate, and he had what I would have had, and that had the egg in it. So they either, I'm not kidding. So it's not revenge I enacted, but someone enacted it on my dad, and that's something that could have made it into Dead Man's Shoes. It's like, got an egg in me pot noodle. Yeah, what does that mean? Oh, I'm going to get murdered.
So I'm working my way back through your work, and let's talk next about This Is England. I mean, you've created this set of characters who've kind of become part of the national psyche, and I guess, you know, particularly loved because, you know, a lot of TV's London-centric and the occasional northern thing. What is it about those characters that made you want to go back?
I think there's something about childhood that you don't kind of get to pick. Well, you'd certainly from a smaller place, but I think something about school and about those days is you're forced to hang around with people that you're probably not going to choose to beyond 18. You know, you're going to be, you know, see you then. But, you know, when I was 11, 12 years old, you know, the gangs, especially in smaller towns, were made up a real hodgepodge of characters, and especially in smaller towns in the 80s, it wasn't like there wasn't enough people to go around to make just a skinhead gang or just a gang of rockers or mods or goths or new romantics. You kind of, the bus shelter would be everything. You know, we'd all be sat outside, there'd be loads of cans of cheap cider and everything of the 80s all on the same bench. And what I kind of realised is that rites of passage where you're kind of coming through, you end up with friends, and I'm still friends with the Gadgets and Woodies, you know, of you know, from my past, and it's like something happens in those days where, you know, you probably, if you met in your 20s or 30s, your lives would be so different. But when we were at school together, the gang I was kind of part of was like a little orphanage, really, and so there was something really special about the fact that to the people in the school and the people that were walking past in the street, you were literally like the shit on their shoe. But within your own thing, there was a real sort of strength and a real deep friendship that you kind of can't shake. And because I happened to come through a time where, and I thought it was really important as well, because my introduction to being a skinhead was so beautiful and was so about Trojan reggae and about understanding the roots of reggae, wearing the jeans with the right, you know, Levi tag on, wearing the right clothes, understanding the heritage of where skinheads came from, you know, and how it was not a racist thing in any shape, size or form, the complete opposite. And I came through a time from being 11 to 13 where it went from that to a kind of guy emerging from prison, from that kind of world, who basically was racist, and how the impact that had, and how the jeans suddenly became bleached and the docks suddenly became 18-holers and the laces meant something. And you know, to see, but I suppose what I was saying is it felt like the first bit had been airbrushed a little bit, you know, and I didn't want, you know, the original Skinheads of 1969, you know, going forward, it all came from a love of, you know, basically the predecessor to reggae music.
And then this gang that was, you know, part of your youth has now become this gang of real life actors who just seem to be a family as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is that thing, isn't it? It's a kind of, it's life imitating art in a way. You know, you couldn't, you know, and obviously what happened, I think at the end of when we'd finished filming, I think we would have stayed friends and it maybe would have ended up the same. But I think because Tomo's mum passed away before the film was finished in the edit, obviously we all probably became closer and gathered around Tomo because he was only 14 at the time. He had his dad and stuff, but so, you know, the nature of the situation at the time was that, you know, we'd always said myself and Mark, the producer, and Stephen Graham and Andrew Shim had always said, look, coming from, if you're going in to do a film and you're maybe not in school and all of that, and the circus comes to town, they all go, you're the best thing ever, and then they all bog off in 8 weeks. That's not going to be fair. We need to keep in contact with him. And obviously a few months after we'd finished, his mum passed away, and so that became even more important, but so maybe that's got something to do with it. But it is, it's really weird, because I go to Uttoxeter and I go out with my dad, and I've kind of got the This Is England that I grew up in, and then I've got the one where I meet the guys who made This Is England, and it's the same crack. Gadget is Gadget. It's like mental.
What do the people that you grew up with think to the show?
Oh, they like it, yeah. Woody, the real Woody, actually is like much bigger and thicker set than Woody. He's kind of like, why did you pick someone really skinny? Because he's a really big guy and all of that. But he laughed. But they're really proud of it.
So what about Gadget as well? Because Gadget's not only in This Is England, is in 24/7, right? Which one of them does real life Gadget prefer?
I'd have to ask him that question. Yeah, I'd have to ask him. I know that the Gadget was a really special friendship for me, because I lived, like I say, Uttoxeter's a small place anyway, but the road I was on, they're built around it now, but it was like this little one road, council houses just at the edge of town. And Gadget was from the sort of the city, this little market town. And I remember when I joined this gang of skinheads, my sister was dating this guy, and we go hunting. I think in the original film, they go out hunting and they leave all these bags for Gadget and Sean to carry. That happened to me, but it was snowing. And so someone threw, Gadget was throwing stuff. I didn't know this kid was coming. He was my age in my year at school, and I don't think we liked each other. We'd only just started, in the middle school or whatever together. Anyway, long story short, there's the skinheads have written in the snow, carry all of this, and put an arrow pointing to these bags. So we were humping the shit on this hunting trip. But unbeknownst to us, they were doing this Olympics event, like a winter Olympics of sports events for me and him, to see who could be the mascot for the gang. So there was this like really poor imitation of Daley Thompson's decathlon in the fields of Uttoxeter, where we were like walking through rivers, climbing trees, and it got to this stage where it was like 4 events all, because he was a bit thicker set than me, so he was winning the strength event. So I was speeding up hills, and it was like 4 all, coming down to the bit we were hunting, and they caught a rabbit, and it was who can kill the rabbit. And both of us froze, and neither of us could do it, and both of us like cried a little bit, and in the end they couldn't split us, so we both became mascots and obviously carried all the stuff back. But I think because we both saw that in each other, that we were we weren't these tough kids that we were making out to be. They were holding this rabbit, they let it go in the end, which I was so pleased with. And I'd got a hammer at one stage. I was looking at its face. I just went, I can't do it. I said, you've won it, Gadget, And he kind of went, to make me dead easy. And he went, oh, God, And the rabbit lived, and we've been mates ever since.
So I think the thing that everyone wants to know, and you've hinted at it before, will the gang get back together at some point?
There's been talk of it a few times, and there's a really nice idea. It nearly got traction again this year, but it's kind of faded away again. The way that the kind of, well, obviously the people that were in it, so many of them have gone on to, they're kind of, to actually, I think we looked at potentially booking it, or if we were looking at doing it, and it's really difficult to get everyone back together. And then obviously, with what's gone on with the industry recently, the lack of funding, all of those kind of things, it just isn't the time. But I've definitely got an idea for a finale. Whether we get there or not, I'm happy with where we got to on 90. But and there's also that worry, the longer you leave it, that you might go back and make something that doesn't stand up, which is a bit of a worry. But I suppose if you get to hang around with your mates for 3 months and it's nearly as good, it might be worth it.
Okay, so back in 2013, you released The Stone Roses Made of Stone. What was it like doing a documentary like that with basically your musical idols? Yeah,
it was incredible, because I'd been a huge fan of the Roses, and obviously I was into the whole indie scene, and what the Manchester thing that went on, and I loved all of that. That felt like, I think I would have been 16 when the Stone Roses seminal album came out, and I ended up getting a ticket for Spike Island. I'd never, Uttoxeter's just not connected in that way, that you kind of, if you went anywhere, you might go to Rock City to an indie night on a Friday. I didn't really see bands and things, and I got a ticket to go and see them at Spike Island, and ended up on a bit of a strange odyssey the night before with some lotions and potions it wasn't very well, and I gave my ticket away to somebody, and regretted it for the majority of my life, because no one had any idea that the record label and then would suddenly go into this 4-year thing where there was a hiatus. Then they came back with the second album and actually split up pretty soon afterwards. So what you thought was going to be there forever, I was sort of, gave this ticket away to what turned out to be their most seminal gig. So I remember getting about 8 people all text me within about 30 minutes and went, "Ian Brown's trying to get hold of you. He wants to ask you something." And I'd seen Ian very briefly at Banksy was doing an exhibition in Bristol, and I'd seen him, and I don't very rarely walk up to people. He's like an absolute hero, so I just went up and introduced myself to him. So I just wondered whether it was maybe something to do with a pop video, or maybe he was doing an album and I might get to do a pop video. And he just said on the phone, "Can you keep a secret?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can keep a secret, And he said, "The Roses are getting back together and we want you to do the documentary." And it was just like, I hope I can keep a secret, and I had to hold it for a couple of months, I think. And it was one of those situations where you've got a job where I was saying to Mark, we both said, if we just get to go to one rehearsal, because obviously it's a volatile band, they've had this crazy history and you don't know whether it's going to happen. I said, if we get to go into one rehearsal, it'll be worth anything, just to do one day. And the first day we went into the rehearsals, I think it's in the film. We go and see Ian. They were working through a tune, and Ian pointed to this little sofa next to him. Me and Mark are both small, sat on these sort of sofas, looking up at your idols while they're practicing some tunes for next year. It was unbelievable. That alone would have been enough for me. And I think because it was funny when it came out, the press were. I remember a lady interviewing me on BBC News. The researchers had realised, that I hadn't picked up on when they fell out on tour, and was kind of going, "Yeah, but like I was a journalist or something, why did you not, when Ian called Rennie names, and why did you not film backstage?" I was like, one, I'd have been thrown off the tour because obviously I was part of that family at that point, and two, it's a love letter to a band. It's not about, I'm not trying to get a scoop. So it was, it's me and Paddy were in a band when we were at drama college. We went and did a few gigs and all of that, and obviously to be able to see that from the side of stage and I always thought as well, when you look at the old tapes, their concerts, because the management that were looking after them shafted them so badly, the sound equipment was always really poor, and I knew what an amazing band they were. And so the ambition to, when you get to Heaton Park, to let people hear how actually incredible they are as a live band was a real sort of honour.
And Ian Brown also played a copper in This Is England, right? Did he take much convincing to do that?
It didn't take any convincing to be a policeman. The hard thing was getting him to take his trainers off. He said he hadn't, whenever he left school in like 1980 or something like that, 1970, he said, "I've not worn leather shoes since 1979. I'm not going to wear them now." And he was laughing, and he put these leather shoes on. I think he got blisters and everything. This really hard pair of police leather shoes. But I just thought that was the funniest ever, to bring Ian Brown in to be a sort of local police officer, I thought was hilarious. But yeah, getting him in the shoes was the trickiest bit.
So as we're doing this interview in a library, I'd like to ask you what's the best book or books you've read recently?
I've reread recently a book that I'd read as a kid, that was about it was a book that kind of, it didn't change my life when I first read it, but it's by a guy called Jimmy Boyle. It was an autobiography, and it was called A Sense of Freedom. And I can remember I was getting into trouble a lot as a kid and starting to really go off the rails when I was about 14. And one of my dad's friends, James, is Scottish man, and knew the story of Jimmy Boyle. He was basically Scotland's most violent prisoner, and he was into the gangs of Gorbals, and he the toughest area in Scotland at the toughest possible time. But he gave me this book, knowing that I'd read it, because I basically, my ambition at 14 was to end up in prison. It was like, that was where I was sort of heading. And he gave me this book, but didn't tell me in the latter third of the book that this guy turns his life around in prison. They got to the point where they tried to break him, to the point that they couldn't break him. It got to the point where they'd come and they beat him so many times, and there were so many of them that would beat him up. They locked him in solitary confinement for 18 months. You're meant to do like 6 days. And then when that made no difference, they shrunk the cell. They put like a cage within it, so it was like a third smaller, or they tried to break his spirit, and he just got tougher. And it came to the point that when they turn up to give him a good hiding, he'd cover himself in his own feces, so at least they went out smelling of his shit. And so in the end, they built this block for the people that they couldn't control. And he went to this block a bit later than everybody else, but he went there and some of his friends are there, and they're like doing embroidery and painting, and he thought it was a trap and a trick, and he refused to sleep on a mattress, and it was like, but over the course of time, they realized that you treat somebody like a caged animal, they're going to behave, but he had a spirit that was completely unbreakable. And he, I can't remember the exact time frame, but say within 12 months, he wanted to become a sculptor, and he became a sculptor and an artist, and is painting himself for tens of thousands of pounds. And that story resonated with me on such a grand level, because you read the first half and go, yeah, I want to be like him, I love gangsters, and then you get to the bit where he actually starts talking about how scared he was, and how, it's like, it was so that guy was really clever to give me that book as a kid, and I reread it again recently, and it still really made a mark on me. It's a film I always wanted to make, but they made one back in the sort of 90s, but I did get to meet Jimmy Boyle at the Edinburgh Film Festival. I think his daughter's a filmmaker, and I met him, and that was like meeting Scorsese for me. It was incredible.
So obviously people like Vicky McClure, Paddy, and others, they're these massive actors now, but you've all come up together and they've started in your films. When Vicky's in Line of Duty and Paddy's in House of the Dragon, do you watch them?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, the one I love the most is when Vicky's in Trigger Point and got things like drones, because I'm saying to her, because obviously I make films, so I'm kind of going, I know that you will have had a camera there with no drone, and this thing's floating out that's going to blow up, and it's quite extreme, it's like, it's not quite improvising in a council flat with us, and I'm just, the skill set that obviously it takes to go into what you would class as things that have got action and, this big sort of things, I just think, I'm bowled over with it, and I'm a Line of Duty fan anyway, and I love watching Vicky in those things. But to be honest, the things I'm most proud of Vicky for are the things that she's done, like the Who Do You Think You Are recently, the documentary she made with her granddad, the Dementia Choir. She could quite happily just sail up into the sunset and make whatever money she wanted to, but she kind of offsets this brilliant thing of being like an action hero, and also, because a lot of people, and I'm not judging anyone, but normally when someone sets up a choir or they do these things, it's like one series. Vicky and the choir are still connected, however many years later. She's a really genuine person, and same with Paddy. I know that Paddy had to, because he's the most incredible improviser you'll ever meet, but he's had to learn how to do script because that wasn't his natural calling. And then so you realise, to end up in, the Game of Thrones, that the House of the Dragon, and to see him in that, knowing that he'll have to be doing that word for word as expertly as he could improvise, it's beautiful to see that development. Obviously that hasn't come from me, they've done that all by themselves.
Obviously you've worked with a lot of untrained actors and things, but is there any really famous actors? I mean, you mentioned Daniel Day-Lewis earlier, for example, that if you just could cast anyone in your next project or in a future project, who would you like to work with?
It would be Daniel Day-Lewis. I would love to work with. I always wanted to meet or work with Paul Newman. Paul Newman as a kid meant so much to me. Seeing the hustle, because I used to gamble a lot when I was a kid playing pool, and I was one of them. I was not good at anything, but I could play pool and seeing the hustler. Cool Hand Luke. Somebody up there likes me. There was something about Paul Newman and the fact that he released his own mayonnaise or like a salad dressing, and he became the equivalent of a Formula One racer. And he was always. I wrote a western that I wanted Paul Newman to play, but he'd passed away before I could get the script out to him. It was about a guy that was of that age that had basically gone over to the West, come over with his family, left them in the East to go for work, and never actually got them to join him. He started, womanizing, getting into gangs and all of that, and never saw them again, and comes back to the town to see if they're still there when he's about 80. And I never got to send him the script because he passed away. So it wasn't a regret, and obviously never probably would have come off. But when he worked with, I've forgotten the director's name, they did, is it Perdition Road? I realised he probably maybe would have read it, but obviously that's too late. So if I get one for Daniel, I'll definitely get that sent out.
In terms of like retirement, I mean, this isn't for now, but Quentin Tarantino is recently, there's a big hype about his next film, because for about 10, 15 years he said, this will be my last film. Do you think like that, or do you just keep going on? Like, do you have a end point in mind?
Yeah, more than ever recently, because it's been really tricky for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are out of work at the moment, both sides of the camera, and there's a lot of it's very difficult to get things funded, which has always been the case, but probably more so than ever. And so that isn't a lot of fun. Maybe I've had 5 things, maybe 6 things that have all been turned down which is cool, but it starts to grate a little bit after a couple of years. We've got some things that look like going, but I think if you're sitting on your hands for 4 or 5 years, I've got friends who direct who had a film maybe 15 years ago that was about to go and lost 10% of its funding that didn't come back, and they still haven't got it off the ground now. If I felt like maybe I couldn't get the stories made, the problem I've got especially with TV, is I tend to make these. This Is England, we're only ever like 3 or 4 episodes, and what they want now for Netflix, obviously, things like Baby Reindeer and that, and I get why, they want those kind of numbers, and I've been into meetings. People have talked about the script, or you've talked about an idea, and they've gone, well, we wouldn't make it unless you took that bit from there and made that the first scene, because we know that people who are watching this are going to have a screen, they're going to be on TikTok, they're going to do that, so we need at least one explosion there. And so then, I'm not saying all my meetings are like that, but something's changed a little bit to the point that you kind of go, it's certainly not infinite like I maybe felt 5-10 years ago. I've got no plans to retire, but if I was sat on my hands for the next 5 years, I'd probably think maybe I should be teaching in a college, or working at doing something slightly different, maybe.
Been like over since The Roses, that was the last film you made. Yeah. Is that intentional? Is that a lifestyle choice, or just because of politics of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it worked really. Television's amazing because you get to obviously be with characters for so much longer. When we did This Is England, because the way that it started, I think, on Romeo Brass, but not fully. I think by the time we got to This Is England, the film, 2005, 2006, when we started rehearsals, I'd always done pre-work with actors, but we started writing a history for every mainish character. So the whole of the gang in This Is England all wrote where they'd come from. They cross-referenced it with their friends. They knew who they'd met at school. Lol and Woody knew when they'd got together, when they'd split up, when she'd been out with Combo. All of this history existed. And what happened after This Is England went out, I think it had been released and been successful and sold, did well on DVD. I was going into Film 4 to have a meeting about a project, and the lady that was on the TV said, I think they just launched Film 4, on like as Freeview, and This Is England had been shown, and it had however many millions of viewers, and it was like their launch night or something, and they were just going, geez, it's a shame we haven't got 10 of them. And this conversation started where I said, yeah, it's a shame, because I always felt like Vicky's character was never really examined properly, but Vicky did the deepest file on her character of anybody. I said, there's a series there that, and that's where it started. Almost someone had kind of gone, there's a real appetite, because, for people to watch that. It hadn't been out that long. That Film 4 probably got launched as Freeview a few years after the release of the film, and they were having more viewers than they were getting for a new program on TV, watching it on Freeview. So that's how that started. And we went and dug these old stories out, and we knew that Lol's background with her father was incredibly dark, and possibly within it and within itself, and that Combo was tied into that. That there was a journey way beyond that original film. So that's what sort of drew me in. And then what I really loved about the TV thing was that everything I'd had released apart from This Is England, you get loads of good reviews in the press and stuff, but then if it goes into the cinema, they go out on a Thursday, and the first 3 films I made, I have a call about midnight, and if it goes well, they expand how many cinemas you're in, and if it hasn't gone well, they shrink it. It's like this is the first day it goes out, so you might go out in 100 screens, and by Monday morning you're on 30, and so the film's viewed as a failure. irrelevant of the press. I used to find that really quite wounding. And so when you're on TV, because it's free, it's not so much now, but when they came out, you get 4 or 5 million people watching This Is England, and it's free. They've chosen, they aren't, walking into a cinema and being able to having to pick from Hollywood films against yours. They're choosing to see it, and there's something about the fact that it's free that I think's lovely. And a lot of the things that touched me when I was a kid, Alan Clark, Mike Lee, Ken Loach, Jim, Derek Jarman and Peter Greenaway, seeing incredible work on TV for nothing, coming back from youth club, and there'd been this crazy Derek Jarman film on. It was like having a little independent cinema on Channel 4. And so I loved going back into that. But I'm now at the stage where the 2 projects I'm trying to get going at the moment are both films, both features. So I'm hoping to be back in a cinema at some point soon.
We know it's hard having to wait a whole month in between LeftLion magazines. Heck, it's difficult enough getting through the week. Worry not, listener, we've answered the call. You can get a pithy, up-to-date digest of the best stuff going on in Nottingham each week direct to your inbox every Wednesday by signing up to the LeftLion Weekly newsletter. LeftLion Weekly contains our top recommendations of events, new content, exclusive competitions and more besides. So what are you waiting for? Visit leftlion.co.uk/newsletter to sign up now.
Attention listeners. During the live events that we record these podcasts at, we sometimes allow a space at the end for audience members to ask the guest a few questions. So if you're wondering why the voice asking the questions seems to change a lot over the next 10 minutes, it's because it's other people asking Shane the questions, not me.
Hiya, lovely to meet you. This is England and 24/7 and Room for Romeo Brass and a Donk and a couple more. They've all got that theme of like there's a paternal character like that kind of rightly or wrongly makes a mistake, always like trying his best, always just the wrong person. But that's a common theme you sort of see. Was that like an intentional thing? And what did your dad think about it? And have you got was that something you kind of based it on, like a family kind of starting point?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a funny one because like a lot of my stuff kind of comes from I was looking for father figures in the street as much as I was at home, So like my sister's boyfriend, I was out the house way more than I was in it, And so you look at something like Romeo Brass. Obviously, there's a lot of distant fathers, and if a psychologist laid me down and asked me questions, what did your dad do for a living when you were young? Long distance lorry driver. They go, what are your films about? Abandonment. You go, okay, session's over, have a think. So it's probably all there, because I used to miss my dad terribly. I can remember Fraser coming around. My dad had, because he worked away like for a week at a time, sometimes longer. And I can remember he gave me, I thought my dad was Elvis at one stage because he had a guitar and an amp in the bedroom. It wasn't a glamorous amp, guitar or bedroom, but and I thought my dad was Elvis, so I used to think he was out on tour. But anyway, he's a lorry driver, so he'd got me this little toy lorry, and in my head as a kid, I remember thinking somehow my dad was inside this little thing. And Fraser came round, my best mate one day, and stood on this truck and broke it. And I went like, it was like someone had killed my father. So you're onto something, definitely. But yeah.
Hello. It's a little bit scary to hear, someone like you struggling for funding. To someone trying to get into the industry, would you say it would be sensible to try, a new approach, taking into account how different the industry is?
I think some of that's probably down to who I am, how I make things, the time it takes me to make things. I think the fact that I don't do any social media, it's like the world's changed around me, and you have a choice whether to temper how you work, and so I think, I don't want it to sort of see, obviously I can see what you mean. It's obviously like if I can't get things funded, it might be worse for everyone else, but I do sort of think, I'm my own worst enemy in some regards, that I take a really long time to craft things and to do things. So, I think at the moment when times are hard, when there's limited funding, if they've got someone that, that's taking 2 years to make 4 eps or someone that's taking 6 months to make 10, you can kind of see the logic. And so hence why I think my work probably is rather than me stretching ideas out and making 10 and it feeling diluted, Because if I could get This Is England 00 funded tomorrow, if I was making 10 or 12 episodes, because then the whole package, the back, it's never been sold to America. You know, there's lots of things I could do to make things fiscally ace for myself. But at the same time, This Is England especially is so personal that if I finish off with just a big splurge of loads where nothing's happening, it wouldn't feel right. So it's kind of, I'm probably becoming a little bit of a dinosaur maybe, I don't know. But I kind of, you know, ultimately I can't change how I make things, you know, so it's that. So I think anyone that's starting out now, when I started out, because it was so difficult to get shorts funded, so my version of where you are would be that I was coming into this game, no one would watch a short that was on video. Short had to be on at least 16 mil, hopefully 35 mil, probably cost 20 to 150 grand. They'd enter it into a competition, absolutely vacuous, looked lovely, didn't really punch you in the guts. But I was making these things at such a rate that I'd got all, you know, this big collection of short films, and it just happened to be at the advent where digital and video projectors, that literally the year that I started making short films, Broadway cinema got a digital projector, you know, like they could project video. And it was initially there for camps, people were having meetings and things like that in one of the smaller cinemas. And so we started running a little short film festival, you know, and I think, and then what happens is when the film clubs, the people that told me to bog off when my films were on high 8, and then suddenly, you know, they've got 20 people turning up once a month, and we had like 150 people, 200 people turning up. It's a bit like YouTube, the power of Vimeo, all of those things is like if the work stands up, you know, if you've got work and your work stands up, you've now got these avenues, and I probably have to investigate them, start doing TikToks, you know, start doing some dance moves, get some followers. Yeah, if you like this, just press that. All of that, Malok. So it's like I've just kind of like, and I don't like that side of it, but I think anyone that's coming through into that side of it, there is a really lovely way that, but then also the downside is that there's also, there's so many people know about that avenue as well that it's like really tricky. So I think if your work's good enough and strong enough, it'll still get noticed. Absolutely 100%. And I think what's lovely is YouTube, you know, especially is an incredibly powerful thing, because again, a bit like TV, people choose with their feet, and advertisers, people who, you know, commercials, they're all starting to look in that direction. So it's, you know, I think it's exciting if you're coming through, but if you've sort of got a bit set in your ways, like me, you've just got a set of spanners, and you know, it may be a little bit more tricky. So, but I think it's hopeful for you and very bad for me.
Thank you very much. Over the years you've been shooting in and around Nottingham, what's the single largest obstacle you've ever encountered in getting to production, and how did you get over it?
In Nottingham specifically, I can remember we had, when we were coming to do This Is England, the series, so we'd done 83, and when we were going to do 86, you kind of can't make a film, you know, in a city without that, with the support of the council. And I'm not the producer, so I don't know all the ins and outs, but what got relayed to me was that the council, so obviously I think the people at the council, what they wanted to charge us and what they wanted to sort of cost us was an extreme amount of money to be able to go back to the same locations and the same flats. I think some of it was viable because there were some flats that were pulling down, but I think someone in the council had sat there and gone, they've already made the film, they can't not come back here, we can charge what we want. And I remember that being a big obstacle, because you're sort of going, you know, you want the money to go on screen and in the actors' pockets. So you don't want it to be going into, you know, the council's pockets if you can help it. You'd hope if you're bringing, you know, say those episodes were like £1 million each, and there's £4 million coming into the town, you think that would be some benefit. So in the end, we had a stand-up, and I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I'm not, you know, there's probably a lot of things that went on that I don't know about, but in the end, it was so bad that we just went, I tell you what, we'll just change all the houses and we'll just move to Sheffield. And we did, and it was like, you know, and I was never privy to them conversations, so I don't know what was going on both sides, but I can remember feeling like, you know, I've been here doing these things. It just felt like a bit of a kick in the teeth at the time. And, you know, and I think some of it would have been that I think some of the flats in St Anne's were coming down, and some of it would have been a natural cost, but it felt like a few people locally and some local funders knew that we were desperate for some completion money, and locally again, they were trying to take advantage of that situation by asking for a lot more of a back end. And so I think between those things, that was one of those where you go, you know, some of these houses are going to look a bit different, but ultimately, you know, we're going to have to do it for the good of the project. And that was sad in a way that we moved to Sheffield, but it did, and we did 3 series there. And, you know, hopefully, you know, whoever was at the council, you know, who was making those calls, or the funding bodies, that I don't think they even exist anymore. But fingers crossed now, if we come back, we can maybe make it work.
Hi, Shane. Have I got it right that you're a Notts County fan? I just wanted to ask, you being from Staffordshire, how that connection with Nottingham came about, and how often you find yourself down Meadow Lane.
Yeah, well, that all came because I wasn't. I pretended I was a Wolves fan when I was at school, because when we went into Bourne Sports, when we did football at school, it was like you just had to go and buy a football top from Bourne Sports, and there was a sail rail, and because the Wolves one at the time was bright orange, so obviously I knew it was going to get some attention in the class, so I pretended that I was a Wolves fan for ages, just because I had this really shit top that blinded people coming to the next session with like sunglasses on and that. I didn't really follow football massively, and I came to do 24/7, and we were talking about Colin Higgins earlier. Colin Higgins was my when I did the film studies stuff at Burton Tech. I met Colin, and he became a bit of a friend, you know, to me and Paddy, and became mates. But so he was a teacher and an artist, but he was always, he was so funny, you know, so naturally funny, a natural comedian, that I ended up saying to him, you know, because I always cast friends or, you know, people that maybe haven't acted before, and he came and did, I don't remember in 24/7, there's a dad that's going on about Notts, and it's like, you know, if football was 85 minutes rather than 91, we'd have won the Champions League and all of that. So he was doing that and I'm going, where are you getting this stuff from, you know? And he started reading off what had gone on with Notts and its history. And I just was like, I've got to come and see this team play. So I ended up going down. It was the year Sam Allardyce was there, and they got promoted. So my first experience of football was like, you turn up, you get promoted, you do pitch invasions. It's amazing, you know. Then Sam Allardyce left, and then obviously all the awful stuff happened. You know, Alan Hardy, all of that malarkey. But that's where I fell in love with football. It was through Colin and being, you know, the fans was. There's a depression that can only exist after 15 years of agony. That even if really good things are, you go, it's not going to last. You know, they're really down in the dumps. And the comments that were coming out, I've been to other football grounds since, and no one else seems to have. Someone shouted out to one of the players at a match, like a player had like given him a bad tackle, and he obviously was going from this guy went, "Leave it alone, Ben. It's just not worth it." And I was like, I'm pretty sure that one ain't going out at Liverpool. You know, leave him alone, Mo. He ain't worth it, mate. You know, it's really loud, and because no one else is talking because they're all sad, you really heard it really clearly. So, but me and my lad Louis went the other week, and we went into the Cop End and stuff. Now he's a bit older, and it's amazing in there. That's because it's like good times again. We both came out of it smelling of cigarettes and hadn't smoked. Louis couldn't hear for about 3 days because of the drum that was going off about that far from his ear section. But it was amazing. It's just one of those clubs that I fell into it completely accidentally. But once I heard "Leave It Alone, Ben, he's just not worth it," I was like, this is for me. I'm really glad you asked the question about Notts County as well. As another fellow pie, did you go to Wembley? I did, yeah. We went down, and there was the accident on the M1. I don't know if you got stuck in that. No, I got stuck in it too. Yeah. Yeah, it was really tough times. It's like a film script of a show, wasn't it? We've like finished this high up, 19 points clear, was it? And then we looked like we're going to lose to our biggest rivals. It was incredible, and I can remember when the penalties were being taken, and and then we bought our specialist penalty saver, and you have those in League Two. Well, we were in non-league at the time. Like 3 of the best saves you're ever going to see in your life. And Chesterfield played loads better than us through the match. But we snuck through in the end, didn't we? Right, I've got one more question, but it's a light one. In 2 months' time, Chanel Cresswell's going to be sitting there. Give me a question to ask her. Ask her what present that she bought for me, a little special present she took for me last night to... She bought a present thinking I might ask her something to the fundraiser last night, and when I saw her, the first thing I asked her, she pulled the present out. So ask her what that was. I'm not going to tell you. She could ruin the answer, won't he?
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Shane. Ladies and gentlemen, give her a big round of applause. So, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. A little bit of football chat at the end there too. You pies! I really enjoyed doing that interview and I learned a few things myself. For example, I had no idea that Gallows Pole had anything to do with Robin Hood, and I think I might go back and watch it again soon with that in mind. I also can't believe that Shane sustained that leg injury during the BAFTA speech. I'd highly recommend watching the BAFTA speech, which has been made available on YouTube since. It's about 40 minutes long and it's very beautiful and from the heart. I'd also recommend checking out Shane's appearance on episode 28 of the Overrated Everything podcast, which is hosted by Andrew Ellis and Thomas Turgoose, who you might also recognise as Gadget and Sean from This Is England. Also, just watch all of Shane's work. There wasn't time in this podcast to talk about his early stuff like Small Time, 24/7, A Room for Romeo Brass, but they're all proper knots. From there on, you have Once Upon a Time in the Midlands, which Shane himself isn't really a big fan of, but I think still stands up as a good example of British films of the era. Then you have Dead Man's Shoes, which is just completely epic and features that breakthrough performance from Paddy Considine. If I had to choose a favourite of Shane's work, I think it'd be that. There's also Somerstown and LeDonk and Scorsese, and there's also lots of shorts, some of which can be hard to find, but I'd highly recommend watching The Living Room, which is a half-hour documentary about Gavin Clark, who did a lot of Shane's musical scores in the early days. That one I managed to find recently on YouTube too. Plus, there's all the shows that he's done that we did talk about. So, unless you're Shane himself, there's really no excuse to keep watching Celebrity Race Against the World, at least until you've watched all of Shane's stuff first. This interview might not have happened if it wasn't for our friends at the Television Workshop. In particular, I'd like to thank Alison Rashley and Carly Dodsley for helping make it happen. Plus, I'd like to thank them generally for the amazing talent that they continue to bring through to entertain us all. As we said in that interview, it's not just the Nottingham actors that you'll know through Shane. It's also Samantha Morton, Bella Ramsey and Joe Dempsey from Game of Thrones, Erin Kellyman from Star Wars and Marvel films. Recently I was watching House of the Dragon and I got through the whole thing before I realised that Ewan Mitchell, who plays the baddie, Aemon Targaryen, was one of theirs too. Honestly, the talent in their ranks never ceases to amaze me. Finally, I just want to give you a quick reminder that we still have 2 live podcast events to go this year. The next one's on Friday the 1st of November and it will be my colleague Adam Pickering in conversation with the amazing singer-songwriter Natalie Duncan. Then, after that, on Friday the 6th of December, I'll be interviewing the actor Chanel Cresswell, and we'll finally find out what the present was that she bought for Shane. Thank you for listening right to the end. Bye bye!